Howie Roseman has seen an MVP candidate quarterback regress before. How does he stop history from repeating itself in Philadelphia? We'll get into it on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcoming Eagles fans to this Wednesday edition of the podcast. It's brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. Gino, did you accept Darius Slay's apology today? I did not.
We're on to Cleveland. That's all I got to say.
I agree. I don't accept the apology and still upset with number 2, as you called him yesterday. But we're going to get into some of the defensive backfield, discussing Sidney Brown soon coming off the PUP list. He'll be ready to go, at least from an active roster standpoint. Against Cleveland, will he be healthy? Will he play? He's got another week to get ready for that. Vic Fangio commented on Cooper DeJean's status. Is he ready to start in the slot over Avonte Maddox? We'll get into that and what's more likely. But got to start the show off with Jalen Hurts, and I think Jalen Hurts' situation from Howie Roseman's perspective is really interesting because Howie has seen this before. And you could even argue he's seen it many times with Michael Vick, with Nick Foles, maybe not to the degree of Jalen Hurts, but Carson Wentz, it was to this degree where a supposed franchise quarterback has a historic MVP type of year. These guys always have felt like we're in like second place, never won MVP, but they had that caliber season and then slowly regressed and then eventually it just plummeted. How does, from Howie's perspective, like if Howie was creating a plan to make sure Jalen doesn't follow that path, Gino, like what are some of the main things that he can do to prevent that?
One of the other things before I jump into that, that's so similar as well, and people don't take it as almost like testimony, but the top 100 players that everybody votes on in the summer was Jalen Hurts and Carson Wentz both not top 3 in
they
their...
They were both number 2, I believe, or number 3 or 2.
They were top 5 in that respective year when they were MVP candidates. The similarities are downright insane. But how do you fix it? It is creepy, but how do you fix it so that history does not repeat itself? Because that's ultimately what we want. We don't want this ship to continue to go down. We want to bail out the water and find a way forward because there's still 13 regular season games to go. You have playoffs right in front of your face if you just fix this thing. And short term, I think is different from the long term. I think short term, it has to fall on the coaching staff. It has to fall on Kellen Moore, Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, having some sort of checks and balances system where they can all be held accountable for what goes on within that offense. I think Nick Sirianni, first things first, just let Kellen Moore call the plays, all of them, not half of them, not 3/4 of them, not all but one or two.
Did you see they're only 19th this year in pre-snap motion? Like they're not even running it that much.
It just seems like there's too much influence from the past regime on this current offense, which I think puts Jalen Hurts in a tough position. But how do you fix it now? I said this on the show yesterday or the day before. Build the boat out of Saquon Barkley. You have this running back here for 3 years, for a limited amount of time. We say we don't want to hand the ball off to him 30 times and just run him up the A and B gap. Well, you don't have to do that. You've seen the bit of creativity that you've been able to use with Saquon Barkley in this offense. There's no reason, though, on the first 9 snaps of the game where you go 3 and out every single time, you only run the ball 2 times. You're a team that runs the ball exceptionally well, and that's always been how you and I have viewed this team, Lou. A team that can run the ball very well, and when they run the ball well, they can be an elite passing offense. And it has to go hand in hand. There has to be a balance to it. And I think moving forward, if you look at the long term, Lou, it comes down to Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman. If one, they decide to keep this staff in-house, there has to be a clear determination of those guidelines that they worked out in season to hopefully right the ship. Or if they do move on, there has to be somebody that is going to build this offense around what Jalen Hurts
Completely
does well, because there's too much, oh, Jalen Hurts doesn't do this well. He can't do this. You got to stop focusing on what he can't. He's a starter in the National Football League. He's not all of a sudden a bad football player. He's a very good football player with a turnover problem that is getting a bit out of control, that has a lot of circumstances outside of just Jalen Hurts that contribute to this.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when it comes to like how do you fix it in season. I think number one, Kellen Moore needs to do more of what we thought he was going to do. That's pre-snap motion. Like, why have we not seen more creative types of run plays for Jalen Hurts outside of your generic RPO? Why isn't there two running backs in the backfield? One gets called in motion and it's a triple option player. Why is there no pistol? Like, why aren't there more creative formations and different personnel packages? I think that could really help. Is that because Nick Sirianni has too much influence? Is Kellen Moore not believing the personnel can handle that? Maybe it's the injuries that he's been holding back the full package without A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. I think you nailed that. I think long-term, it really has to do with the coach. Like, they need first off, a head coach that's going to call plays. Like, you need Jalen Hurts as play caller to stop changing every single year, but you also need a head coach that sees things the same way that Jalen does. And Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, they're polar opposite people. They're polar opposite leaders. I think philosophically they go about things like life in general completely different, right? I think they have some core beliefs of, accountability, and there's certain things they both preach that I guess you could say go hand in hand, but they need a guy. Jalen mentioned, it felt like he was alluding to them not knowing what their identity is. He needs a coach that sees the culture. And almost like energy-wise, they need to have the same vision. I think that's really important. And I don't think Jalen and Nick are on the same page in that way whatsoever. And clearly that's the case considering all the stories we've heard about their relationship, and then the weird response he had on Sunday after the game about them having their moments when it comes to like them setting a message for the team. So overall, I think when it comes to Howie saying, how do I prevent, okay, I'm in the 2019 timeline of this, like Carson Wentz, now Jalen Hurts era. Like, I'm to compare it to Carson's timeline, Jalen's in the 2019 form where he's not done. He still does a lot of great things. How do I stop that 2020 plummet? I think it really all has to do with coaching, because the personnel is there. I mean, the offense, there's nothing else to add. It's really, I think it has everything to do with the head coach.
I think the parallel to 2019 is so spot on as well, because if you look at the personnel that they had, you had to have the coach keep your quarterback in check to where he wasn't playing hero ball all the time and play within the context of the offense. And I really think they kind of got away, all of them, from what that offense was going to bring out in that Tampa Bay game. You were down two of your most important players in the pass game, if not the two most important players in the pass game. You're missing your right tackle, who the record without him in the lineup is extremely bad compared to when he is playing. And you went out there and Kellen Moore called a game like he still had his full personnel out there. Jalen Hurts tried to keep the plays alive like A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith was going to go do some superhero thing in the field. Well, they weren't even out there. And Nick Sirianni, by that time, it all spiraled out of control, and they were already down 21-0 before this team could even make those adjustments. So contextually, they have to rein this thing in. They have to put their differences aside, at least for this year. They got to go about it in a professional manner and do what they've done in the past. That's how I think they can get back to that. I think 2021 is what you should look at. Were things perfect? No. But did you at least get enough out of the season that you could say it was a success? I would say so. And I don't think the season is a downright failure yet. Like, we're still in September, or we just got to October. We're just at the bye week. You still have 13 more opportunities to right the wrong. You still haven't played a division game yet. Contextually, it's all right in front of you. I think it has to do more with the long term, though, Lou, that when we get to the off season, you have to hit that fork in the road of how are we going to avoid heading to 2020 Carson Wentz? Are we going to run it back, try the same formula over again, which is exactly kind of what played out with Doug
You
Peterson
really can't
and
let this year impact your long-term decisions unless they make it to the conference title and they somehow look like the 2022 offense and make a Super Bowl. Unless that happens, Gino, like a 2019 result where you win the division, you're the 4 seed and you lose in the first or second round. Like, yeah, that's good and great that they didn't let the season die, especially from Jalen's perspective, since he's not going anywhere. But I don't think you can let that impact your decision long term.
No, and that might be a huge blessing in
And that's
disguise
something
that
Howie
5
needs to
years
learn
ago.
from, right? Like Howie needs to learn from 2019. Don't run it back and then throw too many cooks in the kitchen. That's clearly what's messing Jalen up. Is I think from a culture standpoint and from a schematic standpoint, there are too many cooks in the kitchen. It feels like every year for this guy.
It almost feels like, I'll use an analogy that's a little bit closer to home, like somebody that plays baseball, right? And they're in a slump, and then they bring in a hitting coach, and then they bring in a sports psychiatrist, and then they bring in another guy to try and fix his feet. And it's like all of a sudden he's got 12 people in his head shouting different things, and he doesn't know what to believe and what to listen to. And that's what probably was the downfall of Wentz, man. Like at that point, you heard so many different teaching points. You didn't know what was right for your game. You didn't know what was wrong for your game. Jalen Hurts the same way, man. Like you're going on he might hit double-digit play callers by the time he's 30 years old in the National Football League from the time he was in college.
I also like what you talked about with running the football. Gino, I think entirely focusing on like getting a lead is important. I think Jalen Hurts is a much, and this is maybe an obvious statement, but he's a much better quarterback with the lead, right? Because then you can pin your ears back, run the football down these teams' throats. And I think some of these habits that are being created in Jalen are because he's always in panic mode. We talked about this after the Tampa game where he's always trying to play hero ball and press, kind of like Carson was because he never had weapons. Jalen is always playing from behind, and I think it's developing this panicky kind of game style. So not only do they need to run the ball, like time of possession, like have the football for more than the other team does, right? And then also defensively, like you need a new scheme that's built to not give up yards and points. Like you need leads. I think you need a more aggressive scheme that also can get takeaways. Like this team is not turning the football over on defense enough too. So I think we're not like focusing on that enough either for like how to help Jalen. If you're Howie, is how do I fix this defense? Like that is, I mean, look at 2022. That was so important for Jalen's MVP season, was a historic pass rush and a historic secondary that would get him the ball on the opposing 35-yard line all the time.
And when you go from record number of sacks 2 years ago to barely affecting the quarterback this year, it all goes hand in hand. And that's the thing. You can look at this short-sighted and say we could probably use a couple more interceptions, use a couple more fumbles, and get the ball in better field position. But ultimately, it comes down to philosophically what you are preaching on defense. Like you had said, we got to get out of this mindset that it's okay to just give up yards between the 20s because a team
you're
like
always
Tampa,
going to give up at least 3 then in that case, and then you're always playing from behind unless you get the ball first and you instantly score. Like I just don't think that's a good recipe for success.
And look at what Tampa did. They went 3 straight times where they cashed it in those situations, and they were just getting every single yard that you were handing them. And all it takes is 1 or 2 bad red zone possessions for your bend don't break defense for the dam to ultimately crack. And that's what happened.
It's so hard to be sustainably like successful on defense when you're a bend don't break defense, right? And I think this defense has played really well in the red zone for the majority of the season through the first month, but I just don't think that's sustainable. So I think those are a lot of the key things that Howie and this entire team can focus on to make sure that Jalen doesn't spiral out of control. Another thing, do not draft a quarterback in the second round next year. That would be another tip, right?
That'd probably be a little wise,
I think
right?
that would help. Yeah, just don't draft a quarterback either. So that's how you fix Jalen Hurts maybe in 2024 and in 2025. Coming up next, we are going to talk some defense. Cooper DeJean, is he ready to start in the slot? Is Sidney Brown back soon? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
As always, this episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. If you don't know what Prize Picks is, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports destination. And the best part about it, it's not you against anybody else, somebody that has 5,000 combinations from all their computer programs. No, it's just you against the Prize Picks projections. Just pick 2 to 6 players. Say, are they going to have more or less than their Prize Picks projection? And you're going to win some money. And right now you can win up to 100 times your money with as easy as 4 picks. Not 1, not 2, 3, 4 picks, and you can win up to 100 times your money. If you want to play along some individuals, some celebrities like Joe Budden, former MMA champ Sugar Sean O'Malley, you could do that as well. And if you want to get in on the action today, it's simple. Go and download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com and use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's right. All you have to do is play $5 and you're going to get $50 instantly over at PrizePicks by using the code LOCKEDONNFL. So get in on the action today over at PrizePicks.
All right, Gino, let's talk some secondary, and this is not going to be about Darius Slay going on rival podcasts and tweeting his resume after a terrible game. I think we got to focus on the young guns, and not just Quinyon Mitchell, who's having a Rookie of the Year type of season so far through the first month. But Vic Fangio mentioned Cooper DeJean the other day about eventually he'll be ready to go in the slot, almost alluding to it's a matter of when, not if, he's going to start over Avonte Maddox, which I'm sure is music to a lot of fans' ears after seeing Maddox get shredded by Tampa Bay on Sunday. And then Sidney Brown as well. Like, he's now eligible to come off the PUP list, got a bye week to get ready for Cleveland. I look at like Kelee Ringo showing off that speed on the conversion off the blocked extra point last week. I really do think it's time, and I'm not saying to bench all three of Darius Slay, Avonte Maddox, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but you got to see what these kids have. And I don't think, obviously they're in a win now window still, I guess you could say, in 2024, but these are high draft picks that I think could be upgrades right now. It's not like Darius Slay, Avonte Maddox, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson are playing like their 2022 form. So I think at least two of those three, if they're not starting, they should be on the field a lot more than we've seen so far.
I wasn't a huge fan of Avonte Maddox coming back into the fold for this very reason, is that you're going to make this argument that
he's in the way.
He's kind of in the way a little bit. And he did play pretty good in those.
He had a solid
second and third game.
I would say second and third game. Yeah. Yeah.
But the one thing he does kind of hinder you with is the size, and it killed you in two of the 4 first matchups. I mean, allowing a touchdown to Christian Watson when it was clear that you need to check out of that situation against Green Bay. And then the same thing happens against Tampa. And I thought Kelee Ringo had an exceptional preseason. It looked like he put on weight. He was a better tackler. He was better in man coverage. And the one thing that can also assist them on the defensive side of the ball to get better this year, Lou, is play the matchups like you have been saying. You can't just go out there, throw your 3 guys out there simply because this is what we do. If Kelee Ringo's in that game, he probably gives you a better opportunity to cover Chris Godwin than Avonte Maddox and Nolan Smith.
And so does Cooper DeJean, Gino. Like, Cooper DeJean's a more physical
better
player.
Tackler.
And is he not as twitchy as Maddox? No, but he has long range 4.3, 4.4 speed. Like, he is an athlete. And like you said, he's a much better tackler. And this is a second-round pick that Vic Fangio now has been saying for a month and a half. He's getting there. He's getting there. And I know he missed all of camp pretty much, but enough's enough. It's October 2nd, and this is a second-round pick that you traded up for. Like, I don't want to hear he's not ready anymore. There's been rookies that have missed a lot of time and still gone in there and played well. Like, I think Cooper DeJean's ready to go. He should be the starting slot guy. Like, I know realistically they're probably not going to bench Slay for Ringo. Like, I can't see that happening. But DeJean should. There's no excuse for him to not be playing over Maddox now. There's no reason. It's not like Maddox is that elite 2022 guy. He's had some high highs, but the low lows have cost you, like, crucially on defense. So I don't know what the hesitation would be to play DeJean.
Avonte Maddox also, he's not somebody that is locked up long term. Like, he wasn't even part of the play. They released him initially.
He was playing safety all summer. He wasn't even part of the nickel plan. So why would you be stubborn now about playing him?
And Kelee Ringo, we're in year 3. Like, we got to figure this out, right? Like, we need to know what we have in this player. And that's
year 2.
He was drafted 2. Oh my God, I get all these Georgia guys mixed up. But
he's about to be in year 3. Like, you would like to know if next year you can rely on him to start opposite Quinyon.
Yeah, fair.
Over Darius
Exactly.
Slay. So
that's something that could potentially happen. And Cooper DeJean, when we go into these looks where we're in nickel and in dime and we're getting ran all over, like, he would have been awesome to have in the lineup last week, man.
Look at him in that game against Minnesota in the preseason, like how he was run fitting. I mean, that was the best trait I thought he had in that game, was his tackling.
Yeah, he was killing it in the crease, killing it in the alley. He was somebody that was flying downhill. And another big thing with guys like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson being in a tough spot, like, you see him taking advantage of in coverage. Well, maybe we put him in a better position to make plays on the ball instead, and don't put him in this position that he clearly is not doing his best at right now. And I don't think it's any fault of him. I think the entire scheme is making all of these guys second guess their first and second thoughts when it comes to playing in this defense. But what can Kelee Ringo bring? What can Cooper DeJean bring? And Sidney Brown, he's another one, man. Like, are you going to say that 3 draft picks that you've had in the last couple years are going to stay off the field because of Avonte Maddox? Is that the legitimate discussion that we are going to have?
I think you need
from
to
now.
see those guys got to be on the field, and I want Brown as that number 6 defensive back. Like when you're running dime packages, like let's see Sidney Brown coming downhill. Like I think they need that kind of aggression right now on defense. Let's see him in some blitz packages. Like that's another 3rd round pick. Like eventually, again, I know it's tough to balance the win now mentality, and you don't want to just like throw those guys out there to develop, but you have to eventually. And Howie said that was a priority this year. Was he talked about Nolan Smith for this example specifically, but you got to play those guys. You got to see if they sink or swim. And a lot of them are sinking right now, but not in the secondary. Quinyon Mitchell has looked great. Like give these other guys a chance to shine too. And again, if the ups and downs continue where you're 3-3, 4-4, 5-4, I just think it's eventually time to give them a shot. The drop-off is not significant enough to where you should be nervous to play these players.
And it would be another short-sighted look at the cornerback room that we were talking again, Lou. We're talking about the parallels between
young and
these two teams.
Does not mean worse. Look at Quinyon Mitchell.
I mean,
just look at your best player in the secondary right now. He's the least experienced one, so you should be encouraged to do this more.
Rasul Douglas, like, what if he was just in a scheme that worked and you didn't have to worry about this, and you still had him here for his like 10th year in Philadelphia in the next couple years? He's pretty good for Buffalo. He played pretty good in Green Bay. Maybe you just let these guys develop. You get these stopgap type of players out of the way. Because it's not like if it was working and Avonte Maddox was a clear shutdown nickel cornerback that took everybody off the board. Yeah, we can have a legitimate discussion about maybe we keep him in until the wheels fall off. But the wheels for Avonte Maddox kind of fell off last year. He hasn't looked the same since that injury from last year. He was good in the middle 2 games of the season, but at the same time, in the other 2 games, he was an outlier at how bad he was in coverage, and it doesn't all come down to him. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson has been bad in coverage. Nakobe Dean probably could see himself off the field on 3rd down. I was saying
that's the other thing, Gino. Like another way to, because I wasn't saying bench CGJ and Slay for Brown and Ringo.
Get the linebackers out.
Maybe we get more one linebacker looks like we used to with Schwartz's defense, where it was only Nigel Bradham out there and Bond and Dean aren't both out there together. You throw out a Ringo or a Brown instead of one of those 2 players. Like that's another thing I think they should really consider, especially considering DeJean's like a good tackler. So if you're a little bit lighter at linebacker, at least you know you have some physicality there. With I think Ringo too, he's a much better tackler than he was as a rookie.
I think play the youth. We've gone down this road before where we're just saying, why are we having these guys who are they going to be here in the next couple years when the rest of this core is around? Like, let's figure out who's a part of our core and who's not, whether they play himself into the lineup or play themselves out of the lineup. Like Nolan Smith, for good or for worse, you're at least seeing what you are getting out of him. Right.
You drafted him in the 1st round. You had to see if he can play. Because if you didn't do this, you wouldn't know. And then each year, you're almost delaying the inevitable. So, unless
sink or swim, man. You got to see if the baby can swim at some point.
And I do realize short-term perspective, the Eagles are not a rebuilding football team. They were supposed to be competing for a Super Bowl this year. I would understand if you were getting, again, like I said, the 2022 version of one of those 3 defensive backs. Yeah, let those young guys ride pine for a little bit. I would understand. 2022, I understood why Nakobe Dean wasn't playing very much. I understood why Cam Jurgens was not playing. Jordan Davis, the same thing. They were gunning for a Super Bowl, and the vets were playing really well. A historic season for all those guys. That's not what you're getting from those 3 defensive backs. So it's time to start DeJean, and it's time to play Ringo and Brown a whole lot more once Brown is healthy.
Should be back. That's what Vic Fangio said in his news conference the other day.
Like, I don't think he should need a huge ramp-up period.
And talk about somebody that you're going to love bringing his energy back to this defense, Lou. Somebody that just like, it's golden retriever mentality, find ball, get ball, go hit ball. And he's somebody that the first time he comes from middle of the field safety, to close that alley, close the crease down, and he makes a tackle. Hopefully he's a better tackler. I think that will light a spark in this team, man. Like, get the youth out there. I think playing these young guys, and for Vic Fangio, like, see if you can implement them in a way that you haven't tried these other guys, man. Like maybe some 3 safety looks that we were talking about in the preseason. You got these players, get the best combination of guys out on the field.
Completely agree. We'll wrap up the Locked On Eagles podcast, a Wednesday edition of the show. Coming up next with What's More Likely. Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. And you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you got to do is place your first $5 bet. We do LOE 3 every single Friday, so just bet with us. The Jalen Hurts anytime touchdown, the over on Dallas Goedert receptions, or if you're betting on Saquon Barkley this year, pretty much every week, you're winning some money through FanDuel. So all you got to do is bet just $5. You're going to get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com. We thank FanDuel for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. All right, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles the way we always do with What's More Likely. And, Gino, I got an interesting one for you. It has to do with the just pretty much right now the state of the team. At 2-2, it feels, even though they have as many wins as losses, it feels so far like a negative season just based on the way this team has played. Even in both wins, it's been a stressful 4 games for sure. What do you think is more likely with the current state of the team? The Eagles end up being the #1 seed this year in the NFC, or Nick Sirianni is fired in season. I think the middle ground is probably very likely here. The Eagles normally don't fire a coach in season, but also the 1 seed, there's a lot of good NFC teams right now. There's a lot of teams we didn't think were going to be as good as we thought, aka the Washington Commanders. So I think both are maybe, I don't want to say a stretch, but less likely than the middle. But what do you think would be more likely between those two outcomes sitting right now at 500 directly at 2-2?
So I'll lay it out like this. The way that Nick Sirianni gets fired in season is the exact way that Chip Kelly got fired in season. If it's towards the playoffs, they're out of it week 15, 16.
Yeah.
They would probably fire him and
like
see
no
if Kellen Moore.
Firing, right?
No, it as
unless
much
they
as
lose
the
the
idea
next
of him
like
firing
4
this
games,
week.
like what if they lose the next like 3 to 5?
Dude,
like what if they
don't even
collapse
say
like
that.
they did last year, just earlier on?
Yeah, that could possibly
That could do
happen.
it.
But I think with the talent on this team, that
Yeah,
I
it's not
do think they will get back. It can't get much more. It can't get worse than this.
I
Like
agree.
it statistically cannot get worse than the 7th most improbable comeback in the next gen stats era and the 6th worst start, not scoring a single point in the first quarter since 2000. So it can't get much statistically worse than that. But I don't think it's going to get better to the point where they win a 1 seed. I think I would hate if Dallas won the division again, and this is how the curse breaks for the first time in back-to-back years. A team wins it since the Eagles did it in 2004. Washington is looking a lot better than people thought.
Like Minnesota, Seattle, I mean Green Bay's got love back.
I want to win the division. That's where I'm at right now. That's still within sight. You haven't played any of those games. We know we look at them as 2 wins because one team in your division gets a loss, you get the win. I think Nick Sirianni in season, because it would be so close to where if you don't win the division, you better hope that some of these NFC teams don't get that wild card spot, and it's like 9 or 10 wins to get in the wild card as opposed to 11 or 12, because I don't think you're going to get to that right now. It's close. This is like a 51-49 for me.
Yeah, I get that. I'm kind of in
know.
the same boat. I would lean a little bit closer towards the 1 seed just because while there's a lot of good NFC teams, I don't know if anybody's established themselves as a juggernaut. I guess Minnesota has. I guess I got to believe it I got to see it for longer to believe it with the Vikings with how good Sam Darnold
Case
looks.
Keenum 2.0.
Yeah, and the same with Jaden Daniels. So I think both teams are going to be really good all year, but are they a 1 seed? I'm not sure. So I still think the Eagles have a chance at that. And just because I don't think, like you mentioned, the team is so talented, I don't think the wheels are going to come off enough to where Howie and Lurie say it's not worth just seeing what this talent can do in the postseason. Let's get rid of the coach now. So I don't think the players, if something like last year did happen again, I think you could see it. I just don't think that's going to happen again to that degree. Which is going to be almost more torturous because they're probably going to be like 9-8 or 10-7.
Yeah,
and you're going to hate your life the entire time to those 10 or 11 wins. But I don't think this team's winning like 4 to 6 games either. It's not a 2012 type of year. But it's close. I'm with you. It's like 51-49.
That 2012 year was rough, man.
Remember,
that
they
was
were
my
3-1, and you hated your
college.
life the whole time because they like led the league in turnovers, and you knew it was coming down. So.
It was inevitable, and then it fell off
and then they
so
lost,
quickly.
10
and then
straight?
then we were the most exciting part of that season was Nick Foles' late season comeback against Tampa, where he wins.
Was
the
that the
game
last time we
final.
won in Tampa? That's what it
That
was.
probably was, and that's probably where the curse started. But no, Lou, I think that. Yes, there's a lot of frustration around this Philadelphia Eagles team right now, both on and off the field. But ultimately, man, I still look at this team on paper and I'm saying, I know what they can do, and I've seen moments of it. Like you've seen moments of it, and hopefully it's different against the division. Like that's one of the things you can lean on. You get those division games later in the season. You get this first one against the Giants in a couple weeks. I think that if Cleveland doesn't give you a little kick in the rear end where you're kind of going at an animal that's a little bit wounded, playing the Giants is going to be the game, especially for your running back who's going to get that whole team hyped up. So maybe coming off this bye, maybe they look internal and they kind of figure this thing out, but there are ways forward, man. Like run the football. Kellen Moore's got to be really genius. Vic Fangio has to not be stubborn, and they just got to find a way to all get on the same page, because long-term, you can't change a team in an off season, and you can't change it in season. That's for sure. So we got to stick with what we got. We're all we got. We're all we need. Hopefully they figure it out.
We'll get you through the bye week all week long and next week right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.